Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming here for the closing ceremony of Samvad. Unfortunately, Ambassador Lakshmi M was not able to join us physically. However, she has graciously accepted to interact with the student body online. We apologize for any convenience this may cause. Good evening, dignitaries, distinguished faculty members, and students. I, Divishri Jha, President of the Diplomania Society,
And I, Shatakshi Tyagi, Treasurer of the JSI Student Council.
welcome you all to the closing ceremony of SAMVAAD' 2024.
Over the span of 2 days, Samvad has presented exciting opportunities to students, research centers, and faculty members to discuss and deliberate. In fact, this was the first time in the history of JSIA that all research centers of the school collaborated and came together on a common platform to put up an elaborate research exhibition. On Monday, we kick-started the conclave with the keynote lecture from Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Following that, we had a thrilling debate and an entertaining quiz where students from across JGU participated.
Today, we began the conclave with a research paper presentation where Professor Mahendra P. Lama, senior faculty at the School of International Studies, JNU, provided insightful remarks and gave advice to the students. It was followed by a professor's roundtable discussion. This was our way of giving back to our professors and integrating their experience into the conclave. Professors keenly interacted with each other and upheld JSI's commitment to keep discourses going. Running simultaneously to these events were our research centers and JSIA Bulletin exhibits, a labor of love from our research centers, which displayed their take on the conclave theme from the lens of their center's area and interest.
I would like to take this opportunity to acquaint everybody in the room with the aim of the JSI Student Council with Samvad. The Student Council's primary aim has always been to serve the student body and make sure that the time at Jindal is equal parts fun and equal parts academic. From organizing events that encourage inter-batch mixing with a dash of dance to mobilizing students for distinguished public lectures, the JSI Student Council has worked tirelessly to provide a global and holistic experience to JSI students. With Samvad, our aim was to celebrate the intellectual curiosity that is so inherent to each and every one of every JSI student. As the council, we deem it our fundamental responsibility to provide students the reach and exposure they need to not only make the campus time more memorable, but also aid them in advancing the future prospects. The tireless nights and in number of meals were memorable though, as Samvad has achieved new heights and has reignited discourse and made students more aware of the opportunities that JSI has to offer.
On that note, we would now like to request Dr. Sriram Cholia, Dean Jindal School of International Affairs, to give his opening remarks.
Namaste everyone. Namaste ma'am. We are missing you in person, but we know the extraordinary situation along the borders have created lots of problems. So, but we'll find a way to bring you to campus in person at a suitable occasion soon. But your presence even online makes a huge difference. We can see you in a larger than life because it's a huge cinema scope screen which all of us are looking at you. So thank you for your gracious presence as always, and also for your intellectual encouragement to our institution and our students. Students, I think many of you, or I hope all of you, have seen my TV show with Ambassador Lakshmi Puri just 3 or 4 weeks ago, where we spoke about her career in the foreign service and how she made choices at critical moments in her life, and what it means to be a foreign service officer. This show has been watched widely online, and if you haven't seen it yet, you really missed something. It was one of my best shows. But I'm so happy that Samvad has come to a fitting finale with Ambassador Lakshmi Puri. The point is, last 2 days, we really engaged in something extra over and above the regular classroom experience. And we really wanted this extracurricular experience to come to the fore, and for all of you to be able to experience learning through activity. Generally, we don't do so much of it. It's very, very monotonous in a classroom and lecture format and in seminar format. But this was different, And I want to thank each and everyone from the student council, from the Diplomania team, the leadership, Professor Damni Kane, Professor Pankaj Jha, and everybody else who've mobilized students to make Diplomania's flagship event a success. Samvad, we hope to do one more round of this maybe later this year. But the point is, you are all getting to experience global issues and politics and affairs through these events. And that was the whole idea. Yesterday, we saw the poster exhibition when Ambassador Sujan Chinay was here, and it was just mind blowing. And I want to thank you all, especially the student coordinators of different research centers who were involved in making presentations. And we'd like to see more such activity and extracurriculars going forward, so that the learning, as Divyashri and Shatakshi were saying, that learning becomes fun, and more importantly, it helps us to showcase our talent, especially to outside audiences. So we would like these to be more regular, and we'd like extracurriculars to be an integral part of the JSIA student life. So this is the first attempt for this year, and we're going to do a lot more. So on behalf of the school and the institution, I want to thank each and everyone, especially all the volunteers and the participants. And of course, we congratulate all the winners who have won in the multiple competitions that were conducted. Let's also think about how maybe we can do this at a larger university level beyond our own school. We have around 650 plus students in the School of International Affairs, but the larger university, as you know, has over 12,000. So I'd like us to think about how we can do events in the future that are more interdisciplinary, and also bring in students and participants from other schools of JGU. And ultimately, why not scale up to making this Samvad so big that we actually have participants from other college students across the country, or at least the National Capital Region of Delhi. So let's be ambitious and think about how we can use this as as a stepping stone to do something bigger, and which will involve a lot many more young people from other institutions as well. So I'd like the Diplomania team and the Student Council to think about something bigger for the fall of this year, and use this as a valuable first step. So thank you everybody for being part of Diplomania. Congratulations to the winner, and special thanks to Ambassador Lakshmi Puri for gracing the occasion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cholya. In continuation with our goals of introducing JSIA student body to practitioners of IR, we wanted to end Samvad on a high note, with a personality that is eminent in discourse both nationally and internationally. We are honored to have with us Ambassador Lakshmi M. Puri.
Ambassador Puri is the former Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations and the former Deputy Executive Director of the UN Women. Prior to her 15-year stint at the United Nations, she served as an Indian diplomat for 28 years. From 1999 until 2002, she was India's ambassador to Hungary, while also concurrently accredited to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Ambassador Puri has also recently released a debut book called Swallowing the Sun. We are grateful to have you with us, Ambassador. We would now like to invite Ambassador Puri to deliver her distinguished public lecture on the theme From Globalization to Deglobalisation, a new blueprint for reglobalization.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm deeply honored and very happy to be able to join you all, although not in person, and that's a very big regret, and I really want to take a rain check on that, because I do want to visit you all, meet you all, and really interact with you on a one-to-one basis as well. But as was mentioned, the demonstration of democracy on the borders have prevented my coming across. And I would like to also thank Professor Cholia, with whom I've had now quite a long association. And he is a very inspiring teacher, as much as he runs this very successful show on Doordarshan on diplomacy. And this great Samvad, which you all have organized, Divyashri and others, congratulations to you. It is, I hope, going to be as much of a manthan as a Samvad that then causes the manthan, and then we hope some gems will come out of this Samudra Manthan of ideas, particularly in areas of IR that you are all focused on. And I believe you are all diplomaniacs. Now, it is also a particular pleasure to me to be speaking to you on a subject that has engaged much of my professional life and animated my public policy conscience, both as a diplomat representing the civilizational values of humanism and universalism, and as a UN official and believer in the 5 major missions of delivering global public goods for humanity: peace, security, disarmament, counterterrorism, that's one; sustainable development, environmental protection, climate action, that's another; humanitarian and disaster response, human rights and democracy, and then, not to forget, technology 4.0. So, for me, and from an Indian perspective too, your theme of reglobalization is about ideas, systems, and mechanisms that better advance some of these projects of humanity in a more effective, and I stress these, effective, equitable, interlinked, and sustainable way. And I will start with Swami Dayanand Saraswati's "Go Back to the Vedas" call to you. On the theme of globalization and reglobalization, one of the organizations that I was associated with for a very long time, and both in the 80s, 90s, and later, I was director of the International Trade Division of UNCTAD for 7 years, and also Deputy Secretary General. And during that time, I was immersed in this discourse, North-South discourse, and in formulating the approach of the South on what you call reglobalization. So it has articulated, indeed, UNCTAD and India within it have articulated the Vedas of sustainable development and ideals of win-win globalization, win-win interdependence from 1968 onwards. And more recently, since 2014 in particular, there is an impulse to use our civilizational inspiration to strive for a beneficial globalization for all countries and people. Now, let us put globalization in perspective. It is a phenomenon in the evolution of the international sustainable development system. It's not something discrete, and determined by and determining international rules of the game and power relations among nations. We have to understand also the international correlation of forces over time and the political economy of it. All this is about the political economy of development and trade and investment and all the other elements. And it's also about, over the decades, and against the vectors of ideological frameworks, templates that were sought to be put forward, formulated and put forward by multilateral and applied by multilateral institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, the multilateral financial institutions, the GATT and WTO, and the OECD, which is controlled by and which have been controlled by and which represent the dominant economic North, mostly Western interests on one side, and UNCTAD with India's participation, active participation, and leadership, acting as a think tank, advocate for the developing countries, that is the economic South, providing a forum for North-South consultation, dialogue, samvad, and cooperation on what? On rewriting the rules of the game to reshape financial and trade relations in a fairer, more balanced manner for the poorer countries and prescribe a code of behavior for the other major global economic actors, the transnational corporations. So that was the remit and the mission of UNCTAD. Now, till 1979, international correlation of forces worked in favor of this. World was divided among the socialist and the Western liberal democracies, post-colonization, third world was coming together. India was in lead, using its moral suasion, voice, and seeking justice for all other developing countries. And G77 was coming together as a group. It began as 77 developing countries. It's now 134 developing countries as a collective bargaining body in UNCTAD and other fora. Even in the MFIs, you had the G24 to influence other rule-making, multilateral systems, and GATT, later WTO. There were issue-based coalitions and broader coalitions. And there was this dreaming up of the new international economic order, and it represented an idealism which even then people said, bordered on utopianism, and maybe today too, when we say re-globalization, we may be accused of that. But I'll come to what perhaps is more possible today and why. I think it's important to recognize, for those who are not in the economic rule-making space in international relations, that power not only flows from the barrel of guns or nuclear missiles, but the rule-making capacity in the financial and trade arenas actually have a capacity to determine the destiny of developing countries around the world. So the attempt, of course, that developing countries made in these bodies, in these negotiations, North-South negotiations they were called, was to get the developed countries to agree to regulatory, legislative commitments, quasi-regulatory, legislative commitments, and also to equitable course of action, and also monitoring of the implementation of that action. And on the other hand, the developed countries wanted to wanted matters to be declaratory, uh, based on voluntarism and goodwill. So that tension continued. Now, UNCTAD began by, and I want to recall these theories because this is the core of the reglobalization idea too that we will be talking about. But UNCTAD began by setting out trade and development theories on existing inequities at that time in the 60s and the 70s. And they suggested templates for changing that. And I want to particularly recall Raoul Prebisch and Hans Singer's core periphery and north-south theories, wherein developing countries were was essayed as being unjustly relegated to the periphery of international trade and economy by the industrialized countries in an exploitative international division of labor, rules, and power relationships. And it set out development models that sought policy space for developing countries, for protection from developed country imports at that time, competing with and destroying nascent industries, services, vulnerable agro and local economies, perpetuating poverty. So, other policies, including setting new terms of trade and commodity prices vis-a-vis that of manufacturing, services, and technology, which the developed countries were masters of. That was also part of this narrative. Preferential and differential treatment to developing countries was sought. Indigenous, pro-poor, customized to local needs development models emphasized as against those prescribed and imposed by Washington consensus of the Bretton Woods institutions, and the role of the state and public sector in developing countries who had just come out of colonialism and were nation building at that time was also emphasized. So the argument at that time, and I have been part of that argument both as a Indian delegate as well as within the within the UNCTAD Secretariat, which by the way was often called the OECD of the South. So, or sometimes the eccentric university, because we used to always come up in the view of the developed countries, we used to come up with pie in the sky ideas and beyond conventional wisdom we used to go. So, you know, we used to, however, also very much pitch our arguments on the trajectories that the developed countries themselves had followed to reach where they had. The same trajectory of Keynesian macroeconomic policies, of state interventions and protections from global competition for arriving at their destinations, which they are denying the developing countries. They were denying the developing countries. And developing countries which start from an even more disadvantaged base. Instead, UNCTAD called on them to vacate their sunset industries and shift them to the developing countries. And of course, it happened in the normal course because it happened because of the competitive advantage and the comparative advantage, whether it is of labor or access to markets or whichever. And to eschew protectionism and themselves undertake structural adjustment, which was being thrust upon developing countries. Now, 1970s heydays of the North-South dialogue amid the South's consultation and bargaining power, which was on account of, you know, there was the famous oil crisis in the 70s. And at that time, the Charter of Rights and Duties of States, Code of Conduct for Transnational Corporations, Transfer of Technology, Common Fund for Commodities. So all of these things came up, were negotiated successfully. So block system worked in favor of developing countries, but steamrolling did not reflect the real global power distribution. But at the same time, another major gain that was made, and I think that's regarded as one of the major triumphs of development dialogue and cooperation, is the famous GSP system, General System of Preferences, which was negotiated in the UNCTAD and then taken to the GATT, which permitted rich countries to provide trade concessions to developing countries, exceptional market access, as an exception to the most favored nation treatment. Now, I don't know how many of you have studied trade law, or I'm sure Ambassador Mohan Kumar, some of you may be his students, so you would know all these ideas, may be familiar. But this is that all under the GATT, WTO, all countries have to be given equal access and equal treatment, most favored nation treatment, but developing countries were allowed certain concessions. So then this was the first. Then what happened was in the 1980s, you had the first West wave of what I would call West-led globalization. And the 1980s, there was a disappearance of the socialist alternative with the breakup of the Soviet Union. Latin American countries were in heavy debt, so they had to go to IMF. Their positions weakened. Yugoslavia breakup. African and Asian economies were in crisis. Of course, it was somewhat the fault of the countries themselves and their governments, but also of international environment. So that really resulted in the first wave of neoliberal globalization in the 1980s. So in the 1990s, US Reagan-led push for market and finance-led economic growth and theories of globalization became dominant narrative. And the ratio of GDP to trade kept increasing, and finance kept increasing. And of course, it was led by corporate profitability, increased velocity of cross-border trade, investment, movement of goods, services, and technology, people, communications, ideas, and worldviews towards global integration of infrastructure and society and culture. That's also an important aspect. And Walden Bellow, who is one of the, at least certainly one of my favorite scholars on globalization, deglobalization, and I'm going to refer to what he says on reglobalization. He called it the accelerated integration of capital, production, and markets. At that time, I remember when the developing countries were overwhelmed by this wave of globalization, neoliberal globalization, and we argued that we should govern it in a more equitable way. It was portrayed as an irresistible force, as something inevitable, as a force of God almost, spontaneous, not amenable to direction of global governance norms. And it was, of course, market, TNC, finance-led. Governments, we were told that government should get out of business, and global supply chains became stronger and stronger. And also that developing countries should sit back and let market forces take their own course. And of course, they recognized that there would be winners and losers among countries and within countries, and that it was difficult to calibrate. On the other hand, there was also this, the conscience keeping that had to be done They would always advise that you protect and insulate the most vulnerable within your country, uh, follow tight monetary policies, fiscal constraints, however, were there. Then, how do you get the developing countries to protect the more vulnerable sections? How do you square the circle for developing countries? That was a major issue. So there was tremendous, there was this famous book by Joseph Stiglitz in 2002, The Discontents of Globalization, wherein he questioned the multilateral financial institution templates, the Washington Consensus, which was underlying this globalization. And there was increased imbalances, instability, unpredictability of financial and currency crisis. And most developing countries suffered, especially the least developed countries, and remained marginalized in the globalizing world economy. So, the configuration of forces seemed against the advocates of change. So, by 2004, when UNCTAD 11 conference happened, there was a move to make this twinning of globalization with the concept of interdependence. This is a very important point. That it and developing countries came from a position of dependency on developed countries. So the idea was that we have to have win-win globalization, which is based on the idea of equity and interdependence. So it, of course, what had been seen by 2004 and later 2008, that there was an overall, many developing countries did benefit from globalization, did become more active in the global marketplace, and they were more enabled to participate, and they got integrated in the world trade and financial systems. But others, equally, others paid a very heavy cost. And also within countries, there were what they called the orphans of globalization. So the point that was made was globalization and interdependence should be inclusive, and it's continuing to be made, by the way, inclusive and equitable. And efficiency, equity, social, human, environmental impact should be weighed carefully and neutralized, and course correction should be made, and policy space should be recognized as vital. Then there was, you've talked about in your paper, you've talked about how there have been shifts. The 2000s saw the rise of the global south, the concept of emerging countries of the south. And this is being called by UNCTAD the second wave of globalization, and where developing countries integration becomes a path to the rise of the global south. Their share of international trade rose to 40%, and intra-trade rose to 45%. This was in 2008. Their multinational corporations emerged and became global. They had a place at the table, and their contribution in outward foreign direct investment increased, their tech absorption and generation increased, multipolarity of economic power was at last becoming a reality. And to what extent that was both a symptom or a result of globalization or not is something that is still being studied. But I think what is important to note is that at that time, I remember that we used to talk about the three big emerging economies: China as the manufacturing power, Brazil as the agriculture power, and India as the knowledge power. And there were a number of there were other studies for big emerging, the BEMS, the big emerging markets, the 10 big emerging markets, etc. So that's how the Global South moniker came into being in that period. And then we have the spectacular, silent but spectacular rise of China. After 2008, the Great Depression, which had cascading impacts on developing countries. However, China not only survived the tsunami, India too survived it, but China's quiet rise has been attributed by many to this period onwards, and it became an undeclared beneficiary at first, and then increasingly a magnet for FDI, for transfer of technology. Its reserves burgeoned. It became an integral and soon a dominant part of global supply chain, and with scale and scope that was unmatched in the world, factory of the world. And with BRI, its Belt and Road Initiative, covering 155 countries, 30% of developing country debt owed to China. So China had graduated to being the other pole if you're looking at the Western economies as one pole, China had become the other pole. It outstripped the US in its trade, in its global trade. So then, if we all remember how President Trump came in on a plank of deglobalization against shipping out jobs to China, he even named India. And what Walden Bellow called the deglobalization movement had begun in the West, joined, of course, also by economically stagnating Europe at that time. So, and COVID-related supply chain disruptions, irony of, and of course, there is the irony of reactions in West on job investment losses, plus Cold War 2.0, deglobalization narrative, withdrawal, the withdrawal syndrome, trade, investment, and technology protectionism began. We all know what have been the trends on this supply, and then shortages, inflation, over dependence on one center, economic center, all of that resulted, and geopolitical divisions, of course, Ukraine war, now Gaza, has worsened the situation, economic situation for the majority of countries, the three Fs, the three fuel, food, and fertilizer crisis, for example. That all of that has led to talk of and move to decoupling, diversification, inshoring, onshoring, friendshoring, nearshoring, and taxing of outward FDI. And for me, this is a big irony from those wanting to have multilateral agreement on investment, massive subsidies and incentives by developed countries for investors into domestic industries or reindustrialization. So all that is happening. And for those who have been trashing market fundamentalism, in any case, this is a joy. And the integration, and the Economist declared the integration of the world economy is in retreat on almost every front. Corporations continue to believe in the efficiency of global supply chains, but like any chain, these are only as strong as their weakest link. A danger point will come if firms decide that this way of organization of production has had its day. So this is the kind of situation that we are facing, and also the share of trade in world GDP has been decelerating, has been going down, has been declining. So there is some element of deglobalization happening. Now the question is, and I want to quote Walden Bellow again, that he has best redefined what reglobalization or reformed globalization should be. He said deglobalization should not be about withdrawing from the world economy. It means restructuring the world economic and political system so that the latter acquires the capacity to reinforce the structures of local, national, and local and national capacities rather than degrading them. It means the transformation, and this is what we are trying to do even in India, by the way. It means the transformation of the world economy from one integrated around the needs of transnational corporations to one integrated around the needs of people, nations, and communities. So this is the main, the germ of what I would say re-globalization. And of course, for me, everything has to be put to the litmus test of sustainable development goals. That's what re-globalization is all about. Is it or is it not delivering that? And if need be, it must transcend the logic of laissez-faire capitalism. Now, just coming very briefly to the Bharat way of re-globalization, I think you all know what happened at G20, and the Bharat or India way has been to drive the thought processes, narratives, policies, and norms of North-South cooperation and multilateral institutions towards a re-globalization that accelerates economic growth for all, especially the global South, and one that is socially and environmentally sustainable. And in some ways, India's own Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, and Sabka Prayas and SDGs touchstone in national and international economic policy philosophy, its calibration of Atmanirbhar Bharat vision with Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Vishwamitra, global solidarity, complementarity, and competitiveness continuum, they say, because some people say these are contradictory to each other. Atmanirbhar Bharat, and then this other global solidarity or globalization, or global looking or world facing and world interacting aspect. But it is not, and that is what India is trying to, in a way, role model. And it provides the world a living experiment and hopefully an inspiration for sustainable re-globalization. Now, India during the G20 presidency showed the way, and since I think I have taken quite a lot of your time, I will just refer you to my essay on, I wrote an essay for the ORF, Observer Research Foundation, on the G20 outcome, India's presidency. But just briefly to say that globalization was replaced by notions of one earth, one family, one future vision, derived from inextricable interdependence of countries and people, and this, our planet. And the Secretary General of UNCTAD at that time spoke about this concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the Upanishadic concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, as having resonance in today's world, not only as a timeless ideal, but as an indictment of our times, because we are not doing that. That's what he was pointing to, meaning the world is not doing that, and that we need to. And he said India could bring the transformative change the world desperately needs. And then, of course, we became the voice of the global south. We emphasized the Sarvodaya, Antodaya principles, the SDGs achievement, the Green Development Pact, all of that. And every conceivable area of cooperation was either committed or scoped out or process commenced in the New Delhi Declaration and in the 112 outcomes of the G20. And also a blueprint for reform of UN, the multilateral financial institutions, principles, code of conduct for governments and private sector from in all areas: health, pandemic, food, nutrition, education, women-led development, international taxation. You asked for it and you had it. So, and also the resource issue. And what is the responsibility of each of the actors for re-globalization to happen? The developed countries, the developing countries, all of that was an own contribution. India offered many things. It had already demonstrated vaccine Maitri, and then digital public infrastructure and social projects, lighthouses. So its quest for people-centric, human-centric development for just financial, economic, social, and environmental order at all levels and local, national, regional, global, like in the past, this may appear illuministic, a belief in the advocacy of special enlightenment. But we are that. India is that. As was the surreal slogan in 1968 when we hosted UNCTAD, India hosted UNCTAD conference. And one of the slogans, if you remember, Prague Spring and others, was a surreal one: be realistic, ask for the impossible. So India is doing that and must try to do that. And I know all this sounds easier said than done, but yes, I think India is making the effort, is today in a position to make the effort. It matters more to the world than it has ever mattered before, and the world matters more to India than it has ever mattered before. So I will let my hero at the end have the last word on this, Swami Vivekananda. This is my favorite quote. I know some of you may have heard it before. He said, "I'm ready to prove that throughout the whole of India that runs a mutual and cordial string of eternal faith in the perfection of humanity. And let that faith be spread over the whole world." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Puri. Now we'll proceed for the prize distribution ceremony. Okay, we'll take a few questions. So anyone in the audience? There are a few questions. There are two questions we'll take. Can we have both the questions together and then perhaps then Ambassador can answer?
So, good evening, Your Excellency, and thank you for a very interesting and enlightening speech on how we transition from globalization to deglobalization and then reglobalization. So, I have actually two doubts about the two questions about the global order. First one is that if we see in the West, we have so many regional groupings. We have the NATO, we have the CATO, we have the CENTO, we have the AUKUS, the Quad, but we see comparatively lesser complete Asian organizations, like we have the SCO, the ASEAN, and the SAARC. So my question is that despite so much promotions about globalization, are the Asian countries or Eastern countries in general trying to move slowly towards the globalization? And that's my first question. My second question is that in a book by Dr. Shashi Tharoor and Dr. Sami Saran titled The New World Order and the Indian Imperative, he has explained about how the world from globalization came to economic nationalism and how India can be a beacon of hope in bringing about this concept of global village. Like we have seen, there's semblance of it in the current G20 G20 presidency of India. So my question is that there's still more work that is left to be done. So what is the way forward in terms of security and in terms of ensuring the healthy global competitions which have lesser political animosity and other such cases like climate change and all?
We'll take the other person's question as well, Ambassador. Yes, all at once, yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. The question I have for the ambassador is related to something that she quoted during her lecture. Ambassador, you defined reglobalization as the redefining of globalization, where the rules of the game would also be redefined. So I was a bit curious about what you meant with this quote, and my question is like a simple one. Number one, who are going to play this game that you are talking about? Number two, who is going to decide the rules of this game? Are they going to be the same like creators that had played the same role in the previous phase of globalization? And number three, if not the previous ones, then who and how? That's all.
Are there any other questions? No. We will then proceed. Ma'am, we'll proceed with the questions now. The answers. Ma'am, are we audible? Ambassador Puri, are we audible?
Yes.
Yes,
Are you asking any more questions?
No. Those are all the questions.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think that is, the question about Europe, economic integration. That's one part of it, which has been in the making for a long time. And we all know how that happened. And also, you referred to the security groupings in Europe and the West, because NATO is also the US and other countries of Europe. So in the West, we have had these formations, but in Asia, we have had sub-regional groupings, but we haven't had a pan-Asian economic grouping yet. And the reality is that our CEP has been moving towards a kind of pan-Asian economic grouping, but India has not joined it for very good reasons, I'm sure. And so it's not as if regionalism is not strong in Asia. But if you look at it in a geopolitical sense, in Asia is not united in the way that Europe has been uniting and united. And I'm not, of course, talking of the Russia Europe divide, but I'm talking about, say, Western Europe, Central Europe, that part of Europe that has joined the European Union, the 27 countries, of course, 26 now. So that is the reason that political differences, I think that also causes, and also the issue of one very dominant partner in the economic and political and security calculus makes other people wary, other partners wary in the region. Now, the other question you asked was the Indian imperative and how India can play a role in creating, basically driving this. I think your question was driving this reglobalization and creating a global village. I think India has been in the forefront of taking advantage of uh, globalization, of ideas, of technology, and the global village is also reflected in the new virtual empires. The platforms that have come up, the virtual platforms that have come up, and India has been very much in the forefront of that. However, you mentioned the security issues, and those do weigh us down. Our neighborhood, the security concerns that we have on all our borders, um, that is something that does weigh us down. But we always try to rise above it and patiently build our economic strength and connect. And the multi-alignment that we have, the policy of multi-alignment that we have, and the partnerships that we are driving with various countries, major countries, great powers, Quad included, is not only an armor for us in many ways, but it is an enabler for us to be um, not only part of the global village, but making the global village. The other question that was asked was rules of the game. What do you mean by rules of the game? Who are going to play it? How? So, as I mentioned, the rules of the game have been veritably uh, dictated by those. If you look at the GATT and WTO, those with the highest trade clout, they will have the greatest say in rule making. The weaker countries will not be able to. But let me mention this, and this has been mentioned by me several times in other fora, that India, whether it is in GATT, whether it is in the MFIs, whether it is in any other fora, India has played a role, has exercised its influence in rule making way beyond its actual power, whether it was trading power, whether it is the size of its economy or share of its share in international trade. And as has been recognized, we use the argument, the power of argument rather than the argument of power. But increasingly, we are being able to be at the table, at the decision making table, and be able to use the argument of power. And we are also making, no longer always making, I think Ambassador Mohan Kumar has written the book on India's moment, and he has referred to the poverty veto. And I did participate in a panel on that book. And I pointed out how increasingly India is uh, not using that poverty veto or argument anymore in the same way. It is doing its own bit. It is making its own deposit for global good. For example, in the area of climate change. So you have to also put your entry fee into the decision making table, and India has been doing that. So that's what I mean by rules of the game. And who decides? So firstly, of course, the empirical fact is if you have power, you are able to shape, but also if you can get the global south with you, the collective bargaining power, that's the other way we have been working. We have also worked across uh, developed and developing country groups in order to determine to shape rules that are more favorable to us and to the global south. So that's the context in which I mentioned how rules are so important.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I would now request the IT team to turn the camera in such a way that the stage is visible. Thank you, Ambassador. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
We will now shift the camera so you can see the stage as we go on with the prize ceremony. All right. Uh, आगे से नहीं हो सकता है? I would also like to invite our Dean, Professor Cholia, Professor Tatiana, and Professor Damni on the stage to felicitate the winners. I'm glad to state that students all across JGU from varied schools had participated in a number of events that we had organized. And we'd start firstly and foremostly with the winner for the poster making competition, Tapasya Sharma. We will show it at the research paper center. Now we move on to the Okay. Now we'll move on to the winners of the debate competition. First and foremost, we have on the third position, Pratyush Butch. On the second position, we have Sarthak Oja. For the first position, we have Mansi Ratnesh. Moving forward, now we have the winners for the quiz competition. For the first position, For the third position of the quiz, we have team number 5, S. Akash Bhargav and Yashveer Singh. For the second position, we have B. Ramakant and Agrim Sinha. For the first position, we have team 3, Mahika Gaur and Aryan Milind Jadhav. That's the second position.
Oh, the second position. Sorry. So third and second are both called runner-up. Okay.
And at the first position, we have Mahika Gaur and Aryan Milind Jadhav. We now move forward with the finalists, the top 5 papers we received from all across JGU for the theme Reglobalisation, Navigating the Way Forward. We now have the top 5 authors. Manan Singh, followed by Tanisha Kohli, yes. Sankalp Wadhwani and Arth Agarwal. Sonakshi Garg, and lastly Sanchali Bhattacharya. I request all of the participants here who have participated in any of the events over the course of the 2 days to please collect their certificates immediately after this ceremony. Post this, we will have a very special video that was made by our team members commemorating both the days of the Samvaad conclave.